And we have to always believe that even if we don't understand kind of all of the mechanics and the biological things that go on, that God created our bodies to work for us. They always work for us, even if it seems to our detriment, or or at times it doesn't feel as pleasurable or painful. Our body is always trying to turn knobs and adjust things to make it habitable for us to live and to think. And sometimes it doesn't have all the dials, or it doesn't have all the switches, or it doesn't have all of the ingredients, and it just kind of goes, well, yeah, we'll just kind of do what we can.
Welcome to The Renewed Mind, the podcast where we explore the world of biblical counseling and bridge the gap to a more holistic understanding of how scripture, psychology, and counseling intersect. The Renewed Mind is here to provide insightful discussions, interviews, and transformative ideas that align with the wisdom of Scripture. And now your hosts, Dr. Luther Smith and Madeline Clark.
Hello. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are and whatever you are doing. This is the Renewed Mind Podcast. We are your hosts. My name is Dr. Luther Smith.
I'm Maddie Clark. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode.
Yes. If you want to know where you can get a hold of us, you can reach out to us on Facebook. That is at The Renewed Mind. That is THERE-NYOO-ED Mind. That is on Facebook. You can also see full episodes on Rumble and YouTube at The Renewed Mind Podcast. You can also connect with us on social media on X at The Renewed Mind Podcast. You can also, with the same handle, connect with us on TikTok and Instagram, where you'll see small clips of the show, and I kind of post several different comments and things on there as well. So if you want to follow us on any of those social media platforms, you are indeed free to do so. We're going to actually skip the summary from last week of what we talked about, so we can just go ahead and jump in to our guest. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, ever since December, as a matter of fact. So for this episode, we are going to be having an interview and a discussion with a woman by the name of Katie Dale. She is way out in Germany, and she is joining us this evening. So let me give a brief introduction to her, and then we will actually invite her on the podcast. Katie Dale writes that she is a voice of faith and reason, reconciling those within the roles of author. She's also an artist, and she's an advocate for mental health and wellness, particularly within the body of Christ, which makes this pretty unique. She's an advocate for mental health equity among the sickest, while speaking, writing, and serving on several multiple mental health organizations. And she has a personal story that is amazing. As I mentioned, I got to meet Katie, I think it's been about 5 or 6 years ago, at a conference called Elephant in the Sanctuary, which was very clever. She's an award-winning author. She has written and published a memoir chronicling her journeys through her bipolar episodes while still holding fast to the faith. Her passion is communicating dynamic insights to enlighten through her writing and her advocacy, while showcasing her artistic talents in her small business, that is Communicated Expressions, LLC. Katie Dale has been married to, she calls her hero, whose name is Chris. She is a mother to Jackson, who is passed. She writes to mom, who is Jackson in heaven, and Kylie on earth. So without further ado, I'd like to bring her on to the podcast. Thank you so much, Katie, for being on The Renewed Mind. We certainly appreciate you being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, you guys. This is great. Pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. And just to put another thing on already the list of things and accolades, you got nominated for an award. Is that what we heard too?
Not quite. I host an awards yearly on around March 30th, which is actually my firstborn's birthday, but also World Bipolar Day.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
yes, so I run those awards in March, and I've been doing that for 4 years now. And to recognize those who are in the church advocating and serving those with mental illness.
That's incredible. Well, that's fantastic too, man.
Yeah.
That is amazing. That is amazing. Well, let's go ahead and jump in to kind of what we wanted to talk about here. So, first of all, you mentioned that you were an artist.
That's right.
So, tell us a little bit about your artistry and what projects are you working on right now as it pertains to kind of your skill set.
So I am naturally gifted in drawing, and I tend to do a lot of pen and ink, black and white sketches. Right now, I'm working with a friend for their book to do some artifacts from the Bible, and that's what I'm currently working on. Plus, for my church, I was just meeting with the ladies at the women's ministry for the retreat coming up, and we'll be doing some painting sessions with that and leading that. But I also like to do graphics and logo design as my jam. So I'm kind of artsy all over with that, with the visual.
That's awesome. How long
Yeah.
have you been doing artistry work?
Since I could pick up a pencil and since I could draw. So yeah, a long time. But probably fell in love with the graphics with the computer in 10th grade computer graphics class with Mr. Wright. And that really opened up Adobe to me and Photoshop and all of that. So I continued to learn it kind of on my own. I don't have any formal like education in it with like a degree of graphic design, but I have an eye for it and just love to do that. Brings a lot of
Amazing.
joy. Yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Besides artistry and being an artisan in that regard, what other things do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, currently active in a group here in Germany, and it's all over. It's international, but a lot of the military wives who like to run, and they bring their kids in their strollers, called the Stroller Warriors, and we like to get out. And it's beautiful here in Germany because you get 4 seasons, and the winters can be cold and dark, but they're kind of mild compared to where I grew up. So in New York. So it's great to be able to run most of the year here, and I like to do that. I also enjoy just hanging out with my daughter and my husband and watching movies. And gosh, I don't know. I do enjoy a lot of different things, but yeah, those are probably my top pursuits and hobbies.
That's amazing. How long have you lived in Germany?
About a year, just over a year. So he got orders and he was away deployed for a year. We got kind of like top choice of pick of where we wanted to go because of that, because he was overseas in Qatar at the time. So I was like, oh, I want to go somewhere in Europe because I have roots in Sicily and I love to just see the world in that part of the world and world Europe. And we know Ramstein because it's just commonly spoken of in the military, where the presence of American troops here is the greatest and concentrated the most. So I figured, okay, they have a medical, team, and if anything, they can support me with my needs here. And I was actually initially we were denied because of my medical background with my diagnosis. I was like, wait a minute, you gotta be kidding me. You guys have like a full hospital here. You can't like take me on. But with the fast help of my psychiatrist, typing up a letter and my own letter of, here's the background, here's the deal. Fact is, I just need my medicine. My case is pretty blessed. I just, as long as I take my antipsychotic and my antidepressant, I am really symptom free and blessed in that. And side effect free. So I guess by prayer and by petition, we got that overturned, and now we're here, and it's been a wonderful year. We've gotten to travel throughout the countrysides and the villages and the cities, and it's quite eye opening. With like just I've never been overseas before, so it was pretty cool to now be living here. But yeah, I still stay in my bubble in a way because our church and our base is all English speaking. Although we do live in the village where there's German locals, the residents here, and our neighbors are really, really kind and friendly. So they speak a little bit English, but it's usually I'm like taking out my phone here, Google Translate. Can I get this interpreted by Google? And it's been great because they're open to that. So yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, you had mentioned before you had came to Germany or trying to get all the paperwork set up and everything that you were almost denied because of your diagnosis.
Yeah, I
So,
was I was straight up like the first time they saw and went through my files, they're like, "Nope, you're not. We cannot serve your purpose. We can't help you." Like they said it in the letter.
wow.
You're not coming over here. The medical readiness officer advises against it. Like if we could have pulled some, things and just gotten me over here without being on his orders, that's still not even like anymore these days. You can't do that. So I was like, what are we going to do? Because he was still coming over here. Well, a month before, of course, it's hurry up and wait in the military. So a month before we get the call, because we're like, they can't just say no for the second time, when we appealed. We were waiting and waiting and waiting. Like, they can't just give us an easy no and get over it. So finally, we get the call a month before. No, it's been overturned. Like, oh, thank God. Like, it was a relief, and
Oh,
it's
sure.
been, yeah, it's been nice to experience different cultures and see different things and different people. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, what I was,
Mhm.
which is amazing, considering the fact that you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder,
Yeah.
right? With
Yeah.
bipolar disorder one,
Right.
if
Right.
I'm not mistaken. And of course, bipolar, if for those who do not know, or for those who are not aware, bipolar disorder is essentially major depressive disorder with mania, generally
Hmm.
speaking. So
Hmm.
tell me a little bit about, or tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
rather, how did, because mania, when people think mania, there's different expressions by which mania
Hmm.
can express itself.
Yeah.
So it's not
That's
just
right.
like one type, or one
Right.
particular behavior.
Right. Oh
So
yeah.
tell me a little bit about how the mania occurred as it pertained to the bipolar disorder that you were diagnosed with. What did it look like?
So it did. So the entire symptoms came on as depression first, just to note, like it's pretty across the board, like typical, I think, for depression to start. So we didn't know that when I started going up, I was getting manic, until I did, which expressed in, so I'm naturally creative, right? But I started like just writing and drawing. And for example, I took a few classmates' caricatures and I expressed them in like the theme of Toy Story. Like each person in my class was a different character from Toy Story. So to my mind, it made sense because the connections it was making based on whether physical attributes or personality, they kind of reminded me of, in a way, this character in Toy Story. And that connection got so strong in my mind that I had to express it. So I drew a picture of them like that and gave it, and the abnormal behavior came out where I gave it to my classmate I had a crush on, only to see him blush. And, it just made things awkward. So things like that, I could go on. I had the ability to rap, just freestyle, like just off the top of my head, in different scenarios when I was like relaxed or really manic. And I could and it would roll and it would rhyme. And I wish I still had that ability. It was pretty cool. But I also had irritability. You have the downs to the mania, irritability where I snapped and had outbursts and then there's my bipolar has psychotic features. So for me, the mania, the up, gets into the atmosphere of like we're outer space here, like we're seeing things, hearing things that aren't there and fit physically. So that would tap into the grandiose thinking that mania can sometimes have with like, oh, I'm a person in the Bible. Like the Bible is speaking to me. God is speaking to me through his word. And I'm Ruth, or I'm like the Song of Solomon girl. Like, so I started having these beliefs merge and like morph into who I thought my identity was. So you could imagine like the behaviors that came out of that as a 16-year-old. Here I am in 10th grade. um, I'm not just having like hormone issues or whatever teenagers go through. I'm having a full on case of mania and psychosis. And I was, I was in a new situation. I was in a new school. I moved from the public school I'd grown up in all my life, my public school system, knowing friends, having been on teams and classes and all, but decided I was going to get a biblical education with a Christian worldview, and changed to the church we went to, and had the school there where my mom taught. So I thought, oh, okay, well, this seems like a noble thing. And I had just been baptized the year before, so I had been like exploring my walk with Christ. I had been saved since I was like 5 and accepted the Lord when I was a little kid, but really dedicated my life again as I was older and growing and maturing. And then, yeah, so 15 years old, at the public school, and then the change really triggered the symptoms and the onset of the illness.
So when were you officially diagnosed?
So that's a great question. And my version of the story is, from what I remember, because at that time I do have crystal clear memories that I chronicled, and like documented this all in my memoir. But the outpatient therapy program that I went to after my 3-week stay inpatient. So I stayed inpatient in 10th grade for 3 weeks, and then I went outpatient. And then the practicing doctor, psychiatrist there at the outpatient program, gave me a copy of the DSM, opened it up to bipolar disorder and the different diagnoses. He says, "What do you think?" I think he might have just, maybe he trusted my judgment, because I totally believe like the patient has the best view of what they're going through. You're your best expert. And I looked at it. I said, I have bipolar disorder, and this all lines up to what I'm feeling and thinking. And in that frame of mind, where I was medicated at that point, stable enough, we got that diagnosis down in black and white rating. So that's when I was technically diagnosed. They don't like to do that with, I guess, the youth, because it's harder to diagnose at that age with different things going on. But yeah, that's when I consider it the start of my diagnosis.
That is a very great thing that your counselor did, by the way, because that expresses, in one sense or another, of course, I can't go back and look into his mind, but the way that he kind of established that, well, what do you think? That was actually affirming your autonomy. Just as a counselee, as a client of his, right? He didn't just come out and say, well, based upon these things, this is what you have. You know what I'm saying? He invited you in
Right.
to talk about this and discuss this. So that was a chef's kiss on on the part of the counselor,
Which brought a lot of relief, like, to my mind. I was like, oh, this makes sense. This is explaining why I acted this way. I'm not like just imagining it or just having some vague meltdown. Yeah.
That's fantastic. What are your thoughts about this, Maddie Madeline? You've been a little quiet. What do you think about just some of this so far? And do you have any questions for her?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for sharing your story with us and engaging with this with us. I heard you say at one point that, you were you got saved as a kid, you rededicated your life, you're like, maybe I'll go to Bible college or something along those lines is kind of what I was hearing you say. And also, this is, if I'm understanding correctly, amidst kind of this initial diagnosis period of first being diagnosed with bipolar, or be around the time that you were initially diagnosed with bipolar. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. So I changed schools, and that triggered the symptoms of the illness at like 10th grade.
You said 5th grade?
10th.
10th grade. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So that makes, okay, I'm tracking now. There's some choppiness here, so it's
Oh, yeah,
challenging
that's okay.
a little bit. But so around 10th grade, sounds like you start to express yourself a little bit more. You're expressing yourself in this new way with these new people, that change in environment. And then I imagine being a 10th grader and being 3 weeks inpatient, probably, along with just the general symptoms of bipolar, probably impacted your personal life pretty significantly, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share about kind of
Yes.
what that looks like and what those implications are for you? Kind of how is that impacting your personal life then, and then, what does that still look like as far as how bipolar affects you on the daily?
That's a great question. So the inpatient hospitalization was a shock. Absolutely, yeah. Going from kind of a sheltered upbringing, very safe, healthy home, my parents together, my brother and I, and really tended to be naive and just sheltered a little bit and safe. But when I got into the hospital, it was a local hospital. They had a juvenile psych ward on one of the floors, and it was up to like 16 years old or 18 maybe. But I was one of the older ones on the floor on the unit, and just basically felt blindsided. One, I didn't know where I was going to get there. My parents, that day I was admitted, they first saw me shook up that morning in school, going to the nurse's office, then going to the psychiatrist outside of school to her office. And the psychiatrist saying, we got a bed here at this local hospital. But I was not privy to the conversation because I'm in my own little world at this point, freaking out with the paranoia, with the symptoms and the voices. So I'm like, okay, where are we going? But I didn't ask that. I couldn't express that, so I'm freaking out, and we're showing up at the hospital. I remember the day. It was March like 16th, 2003. And I was like, it was a gray, bleak day in upstate New York. Like the winters are long there, and just like walking into the hospital, I'm freaking out because we're in the ER first, to get admitted. And there's just the, you've been to a hospital before. You just like, it can be a little high stress in those waiting rooms. So I'm freaking out because of what's going on around me, because any sensory input I get from what I noticed, the first thing I noticed was this lady, one of the intake nurses, I guess, was wearing socks that had like witches' hats on them. And I'm like, everything that I connected in my psychosis and my mania was very spiritual underlying that. So I'm like, here I am, like sitting there, like, what is she doing wearing witches' hats, socks in March? So I'm like rebuking that in my mind, and then start rebuking that in my speech. But they got me to the back eventually, and then I'm like in this gown, and it was really embarrassing because it's the gown they put you in. They don't have a back. I was like freaking out because I'm like, and then they put you on this table that's cold and metal to lay there, like for an exam, like, but I'm barebacked. Like this was just awkward all the way around. And then when I finally get to the floor, they gave me my clothes, put my clothes on, but they took me in a wheelchair, and I'm like, I'm cold, I'm shivering, because in that state of mania and in psychosis, I tend to have like a physiological reaction. I get chills and I get feverish, and it feels that way. So I'm like wrapped up in a blanket with a blanket over my head, freaking out, and they're pushing me in the wheelchair to the unit. So I had no idea what was going on in here or around me. But yeah, it was a shocker. So I get there, but fortunately, the staff was great at that hospital. So kind. I met a lady to this day. I remember her name. I remember her face, and just how kind and compassionate she was toward me. She was one of the staff, but she took me under her wing, and just like introduced me to everybody, and like made me feel really comfortable. So she became like my guardian angel there. Her name was Holly. So that really put me at ease. And the staff was great, very personable people, loved their jobs, and did a great job. So those 3 weeks, yeah, took a toll on me mentally, because it was traumatic in the sense like you're with other troubled kids with troubled minds, and they're locked up too. And you're locked up. I mean, you get like passes to go out for the day and go to another rec center or something. You had schedule you had to follow, and they do your classes and your classwork there. But it was very jarring to my otherwise like peaceful, life experience. And then getting back to like today, like how that informs today, like I said, I don't have any side effects of the meds that I take. Thank God. I have no symptoms, no residual symptoms of the illness. I'm able to function. I will say, like, maybe this has always been me, or maybe it's the medicine, but I do have a delayed, like, for example, right now, like delayed speech sometimes where I'm like trying to process, and I'm an external processor naturally. But especially with my husband, sometimes he's like, get to it. And he's one of those communicators who's like, get to the point. Just give it to me straight. And I'm like, this, and yeah. So it can be maybe a residual side effect. But other than that, I find my life has had a lot of purpose, a lot of meaning. I've held a lot of different jobs over the years, having a family, and both like my brother and my parents, extended family, and then my own family, my husband and my daughter, has been just an adventure. So it's great. Yeah.
That's awesome that now it sounds like you have a fairly decent grasp on your condition in general
Mm-hmm.
and have a fairly good quality of life is what from what it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like. So you experienced this pretty significant change in your life and which spurred on some of these bipolar symptoms. You got
Mm-hmm.
impatient, which was a very difficult and somewhat traumatic experience naturally, right? And then there's a process, I imagine, of kind of recovering and coming back
Mm-hmm.
to kind of your baseline and where you are right now over the number of
Mm-hmm.
years. I wonder, did you notice symptoms or anything significant before kind of this change, or slash did you have any, like, did you attempt to resolve any of these symptoms um, before seeking like the psychiatrist and before seeking clinical mental health services?
I would say that before I entered into the depression the first time, like years, I guess 0 to 15, like I see glimpses of like a stray behavior or a stray thought or a stray hallucination, maybe a handful of times over those years. And then when I did full blown have the onset, it was quick. I will say though, to add, there's typically like a prodromal state and phase of like 9 months to 2 years that it comes on. So I don't know whether that technically happened for me the first time, but then when I got sick and hospitalized the second time at 24 years old, because I went off my meds because I thought I was healed and I thought it was okay, that lack of insight there. It's hard to say whether it was the lack of insight or a combination of that and pride. But I know it was both. It had to be different factors like that that kept me from wanting to take the medicine and wanting to get off of it, and then tapering down because I knew if I go cold turkey, I go into psychosis, which happened the first time, and heard voices, and that was scary. So the second time, I'm like, I'm just going to taper down little by little. I talked to my psychiatrist too. And I was like, I'm stable, and 16 years old might have been, it was 8 years ago, but it might have been just a teenage thing. And they put me on these meds, and it could have been the meds that did it, with the different chemicals. She's like, well, I'm not sure quite when we're going to do that, if we would do that, but we kept meeting, and I kept going down in the dosage. And then when I tried to see her to completely taper, which I guess if I really wanted to do it, I didn't have to see her, but I was doing my due diligence, I'm like, I'm gonna do this the right way, and with all due respect, I'm gonna do this because I'm in control of what goes in my body. Well, she wasn't there available that day at that appointment, so I went to see her colleague who prescribed me the dosages I was asking for. And she didn't see me again after that for a while because I got sick and went back in the hospital for 3 months in and out, in Florida this time. So, and as an adult, every state likes to say, "Oh, we're the worst, and we rank the lowest in this, and this with the mental health care system," but it's all different, and it's all bad in different ways, unfortunately. So, yeah, but that's another kind of direction I think that I go in with my advocacy is, we need to advocate for better laws, better systems across the board federally. And that's another thing I do look toward and work for. But yeah. Anyway, so getting back to that, I think it was just my own stubbornness and pride and anosognosia, the lack of insight, to that clouded my judgment. I'm like, I need those meds for life, not just a one-time deal. Like, no, I need them for life. And many people do that. Half of us, the statistic is half with bipolar, schizophrenia, schizoaffective will not realize that's why we're doing better or that's why we're stable is because of the meds. But we'll go off of them. We'll resist treatment. And it's not our fault. I mean, there's pieces of it that it's like our sinful nature, our pride, but it's also like the brain is not computing like you need this. So yeah.
I actually, when it comes to individuals who have particular psychotic disorders and things like that, it's pretty common for individuals to take meds and then they feel better and then they go, "Oh, I think I'm good now," right? And then
Yes.
not take the meds.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
pretty common. So for you to kind of do that, it's kind of, I don't want to be flippant or anything, but that's somewhat kind of par for the course because
Yep. Yep.
everybody who has those particular challenges seems to
Yeah.
take that direction because they don't. Most individuals don't want to be looked at as abnormal either. They don't
Right.
want to be looked at as a person who has like these weird issues and things like that. Rather than going, it's okay. This is just the way that due to the fact that we live in a fallen world.
Yeah.
The
Exactly.
body doesn't work as optimal as it could work in some people and in some places. I mean, even people who don't have mental difficulties or things like that, we still have to deal with the fact that our bodies get old. Our bodies don't work as well. We get sick even with the common cold and things don't. I mean, I'm getting over a cold for the past week and a half. So I think that your advocacy to say these, individuals who have these issues, they're not, we call it abnormal, but that's only a category. It's not, it doesn't point to the person's substance or lack of importance.
Right. Value, character.
Right.
It's totally separate from behaviors that are stemming from this illness that needs to be treated as an illness and not a character flaw.
Right.
But then there is it totally. I consider it gray area. Like, can I tell if I was hyper, like in my mania, in mania, I had hypersexuality. So I was very it was very strong desires. And then just being in marriage, how come, is it a sin? Is it not? Like stuff like that. Like you can't always black and white, like it's this or that, but you can tell this is probably stemming from the illness. The person has been acting in other ways, and combined with these symptoms, and track record history of who the person is as a person. But yeah, it's complicated.
I would say that you are absolutely correct about that. When we speak of sins, right? And this is one of the things that I think that I guess we're greasing the skids into this topic anyway, because I was curious about asking this about some of the assumptions that believers have made that you've come across when you tell them about your particular diagnosis. But when it comes to things like you mentioned hypersexuality within the framework of bipolar, the one thing that we often don't talk about when it comes to sin is the intent and the context of that intention. So it's not like an individual, like you were looking for, a rendezvous, I'm saying, or a person who's hypersexual is purposefully looking for a rendezvous to cheat on their spouse, right? That person within that particular context, their physiology is being impacted, or is impacting them to kind of respond in this way. All right. So, so it's not a sin, right, when we look at the context and the intent, right, by which this
Yeah.
thing takes place, right? No one murders by accident, right? No one steals by accident, right? These things are intentional. And I
Hmm.
think that that you saying that underscores that there ought to be more
Oh yeah.
nuance,
It's so.
underscored by the details of what has been going on,
Hmm.
rather than just looking at the action and going, "Oh, there it is."
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of cases, even just people who are deteriorating because of the symptoms being untreated, and they're going out and they're murdering their family members who they've always respected and loved. And like cases like that, it just goes to show like it's not the person. Like you can't take the person out of, or the, you can't take that case isolated, um, because these people are not in their right minds. I wasn't thinking and processing at the rate that a normal person and a rational person would, and things are misfiring. You got so much chemistry off the charts that there's no anything. It's just like it's kind of animalistic. Like you just you go to the base like primal roots of like survival, or like the paranoia, that false fear, and you're just like at at that wit's end, literally. So yeah, these have to be taken into context of the whole person.
So this brings up an interesting question. So you meeting with various church groups and things like that, even
Oh.
before you started your advocacy, being involved in the body of Christ and things like that, and maybe individuals not having a lot of knowledge as to what this is.
Hmm.
What are some of the assumptions or things that people make in regards to your bipolar disorder, if you were to talk to them kind of plainly about your symptoms and what you're doing? What would be some of the assumptions that people would make, particularly
Well,
Christians?
people will say, like a lot of advocates or people who have been in my place are like, oh, they said just pray harder and just trust the Lord, and like you're definitely like keeping something, it's sin, it's this or that. For me personally, like I never had, I don't know if I never, but like it didn't come across that strongly in my face, um, when in my personal past, like with the people surrounding me. The people surrounding me were almost just as blindsided by it as I was. So my parents were one in denial at first. Then my counselors were puzzled, or my doctor was, well, let's wait and see. It could be this, it could be that, but let's wait and see. By the time we wait and saw, I was down in left field, like in the hospital. So for me personally, I didn't have people going wagging their finger in my face or anything like that. So it was very actually blessed to have like such a gracious like set of events. Like I could have been in the public school when this went off, and in that case, I don't even know what to begin with, what it would have been like. But I was in a Christian private school with my mom, and taking me to school because she taught there. And, there was a lot of people just puzzled because one, they didn't really know me that well because I was new to the classes. But two, if they didn't know me from church, they're like, oh, she's just having a hard time adjusting. So they didn't put two and two together mostly. So the ignorant kind of view of like, well, what's going on? I don't know. But people who cared about me still, there was people who cared for me there that still cared about how I was doing, even though they didn't know what it was. They still engaged with me. And for that, I'm so thankful because they got me, if they couldn't help me, they got me to somebody who would.
That's awesome.
Although nowadays it's like, you still have those assumptions that I've heard it from the pulpit, unfortunately, that like, and I know it is very nuanced. So sometimes, yes, our lack of trust in God causes us anxiety, or we're sinning because we're anxious. But it's very hard to put blanket statements out about sin in the church, um, concerning anxiety and depression, when we're in the day and age where these things are met and the needs are met through pharmaceutical solutions or therapeutic solutions. and pray yes and claim victory in the blood of Jesus. Well, like I do not discount that. Like I don't think God would have, I don't know. Like I feel like he's answering my prayers exactly to the dosage that I need to function, because a lot of people with my diagnosis are not in the same place. So I'm very fortunate. But I did claim those verses in Isaiah. I did claim, I'm going to be healed. And because of Jesus, what happened on the cross. So my faith had a big play and a piece and a part to play. But it's hard because everybody's different. Everybody has a different level of faith and different experience with their symptoms. So, yeah.
So, would you say that, in your particular experience, that you didn't really have a condemnatory interactions with anyone, but it was more of kind of was it, I don't want to say, for lack of a better word, I don't want to say platitudes, but it was
Mhm.
almost kind of like statements that left you wanting, like trust God. Well, that's a great statement, and we ought to. But
Mhm.
what does that look like in
Yeah.
terms of when I'm going down, or
Yeah.
when I'm
Yeah.
having all of these struggles and these particular issues? What does that look like exactly? Or
Yeah.
if I am in this particular state and I am acting like this, doesn't mean that I don't trust God. Like, it doesn't mean that I'm not, I don't have
Yeah.
enough faith,
Right.
or,
Right.
things like that.
Yeah. And the doctors are there for a reason, like just like any other doctor or psychiatrist. God has granted them the wisdom and the grace of medication. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine, like 100 years ago, I'd be institutionalized, and it would be so different if we didn't have the medicines we have today that have granted that grace of like bringing the person back to wholeness. Um, but yeah, I think there's definitely a place for like pastors referring to therapists and licensed clinical professionals.
Yeah. What you just said reminded me a lot of what kind of our cornerstone for our philosophy is. First Thessalonians 5:14, right? Admonish and really encourage the faint hearted and help the weak. You said something really interesting. You said, and I prayed that I would find healing and I have medication. And I think that that is a really important thing to point out, that God has allowed um, smart people, believers and non believers alike, to work through this process of discovering medications which can help, which can
Mm-hmm.
allow us to assist the weak, which can, and the infirmed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And which can lead to better wholeness in your life and in anyone's lives, and that is not anti-biblical, but it is an example of one of the ways in which we can provide resources, or we can offer resources, or we can at least guide people towards the resources, such as, like you said, good psychiatry or good medical professionals, but also believers who have a proper perspective on the totality of the reality of the host of what God has allowed us to have access to, like you said, right now. And it's not for everybody. It's not for, but it's also, like you said, in a similar way as the, aspect of it being sin. It's not for, and there's no way to blanket that. There's no way to say this is a sin because your mind is not in the right place. So
Right.
let's again, oh, we
Yeah.
gotta get away from that, right?
Sorry, good. Yeah.
You're fine.
No, it made me think of a pastor I spoke to a few months ago, and he was telling me they had a case in their church where it ended up they tried the medicine. This father was a practicing physician, and he was treating his son. Ethically it was fine. So he was trying all these different medicines, and no success, no success, and then they had breakthrough, and they had actually spiritually delivered him from a spiritual thing. But the takeaway from that story was actually, what I took away from it was that Jesus engaged with whoever was hurting. He didn't ignore, he didn't run away from it, like whether it was physical need, bread and loaves of bread and fish, or healing supernaturally, or telling somebody or spitting in the mud and like, or go bathe, and like, like he had different modalities of healing. So it's layered, but yeah, I think to what you were saying, it's definitely yeah.
Just to underscore what you said, we even have Paul writing to Timothy and talking about, take wine for your frequent ailments. Don't take water, take wine
Yeah.
for your frequent ailments. I find that to be very fascinating that he doesn't say, "Hey, well, just pray about it," or
Mm-hmm.
even go find a person who has, the healing and go and
Mm-hmm.
go and go and go and go
Mm-hmm.
talk to them, right? He says,
Yeah.
you've been doing this.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't seem to be working.
Right.
Try this,
Yeah.
right? For your frequent ailments. And it's interesting that the same word for ailments is the same word that's used in 1 Thessalonians 5 that Maddie Madeline brought up. It's the weakness, it's the physical infirmity. So
Um,
even
yeah.
Paul kind of understands this, that there isn't just a silver bullet, right? That he even says, hey, take this
Yeah.
and hopefully this helps. This kind of leads me to another question that I have that I'm very intrigued by too. What was your particular? Did you have a pivot point where you kind of saw this as spiritual, and then kind of realized that this isn't really spiritual? This is more material, or did you were you already kind of aware of that? Did you have a pivot point?
It had to be, I guess the short answer is yes. Like after I fell on my face and was in and out of the hospital for 3 months, and they put me back on what I was on originally. And then I'm like, okay, I can't live without these medicines. It's got to be biochemical. It's got to be the medicine and the chemistry in my brain. The long answer is like, it's so intertwined. Like when you're off your mind's and your brain's functions, man, the devil gets a hold of you so bad. Like he took me for a ride. Like he takes advantage of us when we're not in our right mind anywhere in any headspace. So it definitely has spiritual underpinnings, but yeah, when you take something like the brain, a piece of it away, like you gotta put that piece back in for it to work right, so you can get it on top of whatever the devil wants to do spiritually. But yeah.
I often tell a lot of the counselees that I work with that have these particular challenges. I was working with an individual who had OCD, and I was telling, and they were very beside themselves, right? They actually thought that they were demonically possessed as a result of them having obsessive compulsive disorder. And I had mentioned to them, I said, what if like we can there are limitations to your brain chemistry for sure. But what if, let's flip it on its head. What if this is your brain's best attempt to help you, and it's doing what it knows based upon all of the neurotransmitters it has, all of the all of the things that it has. It's trying its best, and this is what it's producing.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I never thought about that, right? Or in that
Mm-hmm.
sense, right? That
Yeah.
my abnormality is the body. It's like trying to, have you ever tried to have you ever tried to cut steak with a butter knife because that's all you got?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I'm
That's
saying?
right.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like, well,
Yeah.
we're gonna
We're
try,
working.
right?
Yep.
It's not gonna be pretty. But
Right.
I said that's what your brain is doing. Your brain is
Mm-hmm.
trying to cut a steak with a butter knife, and
That's
that's
right.
all it's
Mm-hmm.
got. We have to always believe that even if we don't understand kind of all of the mechanics and the biological things that
Yeah.
go on, that God created our bodies to work for us. They
Mm-hmm.
always work for us, even if it
Mm-hmm.
it seems to our detriment, or
Mm-hmm.
or times it doesn't feel as pleasurable or painful. Our body is always trying to turn knobs and adjust
Mm-hmm.
things to make it habitable for us
Yes,
to
right,
live
right,
and
right.
to think. And sometimes it doesn't have all the dials, or it doesn't have all the
Right.
switches, or it doesn't
Yes.
have all of the ingredients, and it just kind of goes, well,
Screws are a little loose.
yeah, we'll
Yeah.
just kind of do what we can. Um,
Yeah.
so
That's right. That's
so
right.
that's you
That's a
bringing
great
up, that's excellent.
illustration. That's a good illustration too.
Go ahead, Maddie.
I was just gonna say, like, I think I appreciate that perspective of like the butter knife trying to cut the steak, like that there is so much compassion in that, and so much like almost like a breath of fresh air. I feel like that people can get out of hearing that.
Hmm.
But I think it feels like a breath of fresh air because you kind of get this sense of like, I don't know what to do with this. Like I feel like there's something else that needs to be done. I feel like there's something more. I don't know how to handle it. And there's this like constant tension. And I know as a family member of people with various different mental illnesses, but also witnessing individuals with bipolar in some of the more manic, sometimes psychotic moments,
Hmm.
that it can be kind of hard to witness. And it
Hmm.
can be kind of hard to handle. And I wonder, from your perspective of experiencing bipolar, but also experiencing the recovery from and relapse of and recovery from that, what would be some wisdom that you would offer for individuals who are loved ones of people
Hmm.
who are challenged by bipolar mania, some psychotic
Yeah,
features?
that's good you asked that. So I spent about 3 years working at an outpatient clinic in rural Missouri, and they trained me as a like a caseworker to various diagnoses and dealings with people who have, you know, neuropsychiatric and like general anxiety and major depressive and all that. One of the techniques and methods we talk about is motivational interviewing, and this is very you can get a lot of breakthrough with people that, especially with anosognosia, the lack of insight, where they don't recognize that they're sick. So what we go through with that is an acronym of OARS. O for OARS stands for open-ended questions. So basically, this is all like good listening, um, and the first thing you want to do is ask an open-ended question. Um, and then A is affirm. So with your response, you're going to listen to it. You're going to validate how they're feeling and thinking, and okay, and see where they're coming from. R is reflect, or we make a summarized or a paraphrased in your own words what they're saying. Like, okay, so it seems like you're saying this, or that seems hard, or okay, what you're going through from what you're telling me is, and then at the end of the conversation, you summarize. That's the S, is you summarize what you've discussed. And you can have multiple conversations like this throughout the day, throughout the week with them. But what it does is kind of unlocks the door to build rapport with them, for them to trust you, for them to feel close and heard and understood. And I will recall many, many, many times in mania and psychosis that the absolute desire of my heart was for people to hear me, understand me, and I will say, believe me. Because when you're saying, and because when you're witnessing things in your mind that aren't there physically, you want to know why. And you want to know, I'm not crazy, am I? Like, but like in Alzheimer's, in a dementia patient, you get into their world with them. You step into, you don't argue, you don't disagree, you don't value like, oh, that's good or that's bad. So don't discount, don't say, oh, that seems real, or that seems real, or that isn't real. You don't argue about it. You just let them kind of come alongside them, to understand where they're coming from. Because if it is unbased and it is a hallucination, a delusion, And a lot of, I think, cognitive behavioral therapy, questioning, well, why do you believe this kind of thinking, can be very helpful, and insight can grow in that person's mind. The kind of light kind of can turn on for them to realize on their own, kind of feeling like they came to it on their own, to discover, wait, that's not quite right. And the light can go off for them. So I suggest motivational interviewing, coming at it, definitely peacefully and trying not to stir the pot too much. Obviously, like if they're in a far gone state where they are acting out of control, you want to get them help more immediately and urgently, especially if the risk is that they've been going on some time now acting this way or believing these ways like irrationally. Get them the help that they need. If they won't listen, they resist, they isolate. If you think they're harm to themselves, or if they're within reach of any kind of weapons or any kind of method of a plan or a way to hurt themselves or others, you definitely want to call 911. A step before, if you have time, like if we're not there quite yet, 988 is a good resource, the crisis hotline for mental health. If you have a crisis intervention trained police force or people staffed in the police force that have crisis intervention training, get with them. Surround yourself with support teams. Educate yourself about the illness. Can't stress that enough, because once you understand that, like, half of us don't get it, like half of us have that lack of insight, not to no fault of our own, or that it is a mental illness that still needs to be treated, and here's what it happens when you don't treat it, or here's what to look for on the horizon after the depression or after the mania, and that's coming down the road. Educate yourself. And then the last thing I guess I would say is, well, maybe not the most important thing, but another piece people don't think about is like, especially in bipolar with hyper-religiosity, telling someone, oh, I'll pray for you, or like, do you want to pray together? Like, that could be a little bit triggering, just so you're aware. Like, scripture can be a little triggering in bipolar mania. Even depression and anxiety, people don't necessarily want to hear that, but definitely lift them up in prayer. Pray for them, so, and get them to the right psychiatrist. Doesn't have to be Christian, and a counselor. I recommend Christian counselors for Christians, and cognitive behavioral therapy.
For those who don't have that particular knowledge or expertise, family members, friends, things like that, would the question, what do you need from me, or how can I help? Would that be an appropriate question to ask?
Yeah, it can be, and I've found the answer to that is usually listen to me, believe me. But yes, if physically they need like medication, or I mean, they won't say I need my medicine, but like, how can I help? If you just sit down with me and listen, that's a good question. Yeah, to ask, what do you need? What can I do for you, or how can I help you? And if they're depressed and their state of mind, they can rationalize. Yeah, that would be good too. Especially, yeah.
Kind of reminds me of two things from Scripture. Paul writes in the kind of at the end of Romans to what is that? Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. You kind of have to read the room. Like you mentioned, if a person is depressed or they're struggling or something like that, the best thing to do is just kind of to match their energy, and
Yeah. Yes.
and just to be present with them, rather than,
Yes.
you don't have to necessarily offer anything. It's kind of the same thing that's underscored in the historical account of Job. Job's friends did well until they opened their mouth. You know what I'm saying? That just
Yeah.
sitting there silent with him
Yes.
and mourning with him, and kind of allowing him to process these things,
Yeah.
processing it along with him. If the account ended there, that would be great. But then they decided to try to give him a lot of spiritual wisdom, and it ended up blowing up in their face. But that's great.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a good point.
so you before we kind of let you go, we're kind of winding down
Hmm.
the end of our interview here, but you have tons of resources. So tell us the title of your books and where they can find them and your resources and some of where they can find those as well.
The book I wrote is a memoir. It's called But Deliver Me from Crazy, available on Amazon. And I also have a free download of an ebook on my website. If you go to katiardale.com/resources, on the resources page, there is a printable PDF that you can fill out. It's called the Game Plan Mental Health Resource Guide. I've put together in like a 10, 12 page printout. You can fill it in. It's got placeholders for your medical history, mental health history, medications you're taking, medications you've been on that may or may not have worked, and then of course like your team, your support team, from caseworker to lawyer to um, disclosure statements that, if you've like, you can indicate that you've disclosed your mental health history or whatever, and then suicide prevention plan, plus many vetted resources like secular and faith-based organizations, influencers, broadcasts, podcasts, YouTube channels, people that I run in circles with that just like are for this. They're advocating for the church to be a leader, to help with the mental health arena. Yeah.
That's excellent. Thank you very much for that. And what was the website create?
Yeah, it's Katie, KATIE, Dale, DALE.com.
Excellent. And I think you
Awesome.
do you still do Bipolar Brave too as well?
So that's a part of it. If you type in bipolarbrave.com, it goes there. But I still have a blog, a Bipolar Brave themed blog. Like that's my mental health and faith topics. And then the other one is communicated
Okay.
blog. So that's like anything sans mental health, like life, faith, and other topics.
Excellent.
So yeah.
Very, very, very good. Very, very good. Do you
Yeah.
have any
That's awesome.
speaking of which, do you have any speaking engagements or anything else that is kind of lined up for this year that you're that's percolating throughout the year?
Yeah, I just had an interview this week with Aware Now magazine, so that'll be coming out. There's another one coming out with Tony Mantor. He's out of Nashville. We are the we are the world. I can't. It's an association with an autism awareness and mental health awareness month. They'll be coming out with that in May, a series that I was a guest on, and then maybe a few other things down the pike, but I don't know offhand. But that's what I got.
Well,
Yeah.
that's keeping you more than busy.
Yeah. Hmm.
Very, very cool. Well, again, we would like to personally thank you for taking the time. I mean, I know that the time difference is crazy from where we are to where you are, but I really, 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 really appreciate you
Oh.
coming on and being interviewed and sharing your story along with some of the listeners that we have and things like that. I'd like to give you the floor before we kind of let you go. Any final
Oh.
words for the Renewed Mind podcast or those who might be listening?
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. But yeah, there's always hope. Rest assured, we go through storms in life, and we go through them to comfort other people with the comfort we've been comforted with. And God sees everything. Whatever we see, He sees, and whatever we feel, He knows. He's closely acquainted with all those things. So be encouraged. There is help. There are resources. Please feel free to check them out. And I think it's been a blessing to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank
Well,
you, Maddie. Thank you, Dr. Smith.
thank you.
Thank you very much, Katie, so much for sharing your story, and for giving us that piece of wisdom is that there's always hope, and the comfort comes from the ultimate comforter. We really appreciate you coming on, and and sharing and being vulnerable with us. And I think your work and advocacy and what you've put together is pretty incredible. So thank you very much for that as well.
Definitely.
We will
Thank you guys. Love to.
we will also put Katie Dale's information in our YouTube page and our Rumble and everywhere where you frequent your podcasts and everything else like that. So if you want to go and check out some of her resources, she's got articles, blogs. She's got a resource list that is huge. It is huge. So we definitely want to give you that information so that if you feel the need to use it and or someone else might use it, then please pass that along. So again, excellent. Thank you so much, Katie. Grace and peace to you and to your family. And we might have to have you on some other time, man. I really enjoyed talking with you. We might have to have you on another time and
Awesome.
talk about just mental health just in general
I'd
rather
love
than
to.
bipolar. So
Yeah.
that'd be kind of that'd be
Wonderful.
great. All right. Well, grace and peace to you, and
Thank you guys.
we will talk to you. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. God bless.
All right. Grace and peace. Bye bye. Okay. Okay. So before we close out this episode, Maddie Madeline, some final thoughts concerning our interview with Mrs. Dale and just her experience with bipolar.
Yeah, I just think the best summary of what her theme and to drive home is listen, listen and be present with individuals who are battling bipolar or various different mental illness, because to listen, to hear what's going on, right? She gave great example of oars and just of tangibly how to do that, but also to just affirm and say, remind them of reality, remind them of who they are and of their worth and value regardless of what's going on, and to just listen, and just be present. And it's so simple that sometimes we miss it, because we're like, there's this complex disorder, there's all these different aspects of it, and it can look different for everybody. But I would say really the best way to kind of summarize what she said is not everyone has a different context, everyone experiences it differently. So just listen and just be present and be a dealer of hope, essentially, in that presentness with that person. So I really appreciated that. And I appreciated her being willing to share her story and be really transparent with us about, what that's looked like for her.
Yes, yeah, I really appreciated the oars as well. And it's kind of fascinating that within motivational interviewing and the oars, again, it's really no different from anything that we've been talking about this whole time. That all of these skill sets can be used for the counselor to complete three things: admonishing the unruly, encouraging the faint-hearted, and helping the weak. I mean, you can incorporate those skills into any sort of aspect of that particular cornerstone, which is just fantastic. And she's just a wonderful lady, great gal, doing lots for making people aware and knowing what this is all about. So again, grace and peace to her, and she's altogether cool. Well, I hope that you liked the show, and I hope that you learned some things, particularly about bipolar disorder. And this again continues on our subject and topic of mental illness, which we've been talking about for the past several weeks, actually. So we will continue on this particular road. Again, if you would like to connect with us by social media or by email, you can do so. You can reach us at our Facebook handle at The Renewed Mind. That is THERE hyphen NYOO hyphen ED mind. That is on Facebook. You can also reach us on X and Instagram and TikTok at The Renewed Mind Podcast, all one word. And you can also watch, again, if you don't frequent podcasting or hearing in the audio, you can see us visually on YouTube and on Rumble as well. And also to our email address is the renewed mind podcast at gmail.com. The renewed mind podcast at gmail.com. So if you'd like to comment on this episode or any of the previous episodes that we've had so far, you can do that as well. And if we ever get any emails, we will read them too as well if they catch our interest. So that'll be kind of neat. Next episode, we will be going through the material and the immaterial and how they work together. I think this is a good time to start talking about this and continuing to unpack this. So we're actually going to go to scripture to look at this and to look at the dynamic of how these two things work together. And we're going to look at a specific scripture found in the Gospels, particularly Luke. So we're going to be walking through that and then talking about how this could be important information to consider when you are counseling an individual biblically, that again you're working with two aspects of an individual, not just one. So we will continue to underscore that as we work through mental health, mental illness, counseling biblically, and all things that we talk about here on the Renewed Mind podcast. Well, I think we'll wrap this one up and close this out. Well, my name is Dr. Luther Smith.
And I'm Maddie Clark. Thank you so much for listening to the Renewed Mind podcast.
Hey, take care, grace and peace to you, and we will catch you on the next episode. All right, take care. Bye-bye.